There's currently a video recirculating online. It's an interaction between a U.S. Congress representative and J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon during congressional hearings in 2019. The Congresswoman points to a job posting for a full-time position at a Chase Bank in Irvine, California, that was advertised at $16.50 per hour. She then lays out the cost of living for one of her constituents applying for that job, a single mother of one child living in a one-bedroom apartment, surviving on less than $400 a month in food, an old car for transportation, after-school care for her child. After just those things, the single mother's budget was in the red by more than $500 without considering clothing or school lunches or any other of those expenses of the month that we all know about so well. After she lays out all of that, does the math on a whiteboard, actually, she looks to the CEO of the largest, most profitable bank in the history of the world, a bank that in 2023 cleared a profit of almost $50 billion. Look to a CEO whose personal wealth is estimated to be well over $2 billion. And she asked him if with all of his economic wisdom, all of his genius, if he could suggest to this single mother a way to make ends meet on $16.50 per hour, working full-time at a Chase Bank. Let's just say, of course, that his answers were less than satisfactory. He said he would have to think about it and would love to have a conversation with her about her financial situation. I think he missed the point of the question. On Thursday night, several of us attended an annual fundraiser for WestHab, where we heard stories of the incredible challenges that the working poor encounter when trying to secure affordable housing. We heard stories of people who were working full-time, working multiple jobs, even doing all the right things, and still at night sleeping in the WestHab shelters. Of course, we also heard stories of incredible success and the resiliency of the human spirit. Research suggests that 73% of workers with full-time jobs struggle to cover just the necessities of life. No frills, just the necessities, with over 39 million Americans earning less than $17 per hour. Over the last several years, we have had the privilege to work with multiple Afghan families who were granted asylum into the country after working for the United States government during the war in Afghanistan. We have witnessed firsthand the challenges of making ends meet on the meager minimum wage jobs that they are able to get. The math just simply doesn't work. And now, according to a report in the New York Times, if this administration gets its way, then they could be deported to the Democratic Republic of Congo, of all places. I wonder what Jamie Dimon would suggest for their economic situation. The top 10% of Americans hold over 2/3 of the nation's wealth, with the top 1% of wealthiest people in America holding the same amount as the bottom 90%. The top 1% holds the same amount as the bottom 90%. The bottom 50% of Americans only hold about 2.5% of the nation's wealth, while the top 1% holds more than 30% of the nation's wealth, and that gap grows every single year. It gets wider every single year. More than 10% of our population lives below the poverty line. I haven't even mentioned the effect that race or gender has on these numbers in America. Just for a moment, let's leave our nation and look to USAID. The cutting of USAID, which accounted for less than 1% of the federal budget, less than 1%. But the cutting of USAID is estimated to directly cause more than 14 million preventable deaths by the year 2030. 4.5 million of those deaths are estimated to be children under the age of 5. 4.5 million children under the age of 5, 1% less than 1% of the federal budget. That's a genocide, just to be clear. Estimates put the total cost of the war in Iran around $1 billion a day, which means that the U.S. could have more than covered the entire budget of USAID this year, simply not by bombing Iran. The cryptocurrency grift, AI technology, the for-profit prison system, the not in my backyard attitude toward affordable housing, gas prices through the roof, online betting markets, the back-breaking cost of college, and the predatory nature of debt. The list goes on and on and on. Cicero once said, "When money is unreasonably coveted, it is a disease of the mind which is called avarice." Money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is. And I'm no exception. I live in a nice house. I don't own the house, but I live in a nice house. I really love a good meal out with my wife. A vacation with my family is probably my favorite thing. I have 4 kids to send to college, and so money is constantly on my mind. And let's not kid ourselves, although we are a very diverse congregation economically, I am giving this sermon right now in Scarsdale, New York, the wealthiest suburb in America. How's everybody feeling right now? You voluntarily came here for this. In fact, you give generously for this. Money is a problem. It's just a fact of life. No matter how many times Paula White or Franklin Graham or Joel Osteen tells you that it's not, the love of money is the problem of our culture, for our community, and for our spiritual well-being. It is the moral crisis of our time as God's sheep are turned into prey. Now, with all of that in mind, let's go back to Acts chapter 2 for just a moment, which gives us a description of the earliest Christian community, the one led by Peter, upon whom the church was built. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and they ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. They were all together. They had all things in common. They sold their possessions and they distributed all they had to those who needed it most. They spent a ton of time together so that they knew who needed what. They broke bread together and they ate together, and they did all of it, it says, with glad and with generous hearts. It is a description of the beloved community. It is the ideal imagery that we are given of what life in the church really is. And with that image in mind of what the ideal is, we can say with absolute certainty that a nation where just a relatively few people hold the most of the wealth, while the vast majority struggle to even survive, it simply cannot be called a Christian nation. A nation that cuts less than 1% of its budget for the purpose of increasing that gap simply cannot be called a Christian nation. This sermon is not prescriptive. I'm not pushing some far-left socialist agenda, don't worry. Nor am I about to renounce my beach vacation with my family this summer. I'm not giving it up. But when this text pops up on the lectionary, we don't get to just skip by it. We can't ignore it and pretend that it says something it doesn't say. We have to sit with it. We have to struggle with it. We have to see our reflection in it. We have to feel every free market capitalist muscle within our bodies stiffen in response to it. And then we have to ask ourselves why. The first Christian community after the resurrection and after Pentecost shared everything they had. And they did so with glad and with generous hearts. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who has a glad and generous heart? I bet most of you have someone popping up in your mind right now. When you're around that person, it is obvious. It informs everything that they do. It informs the way that they do everything that they do with glad and with generous hearts. My prayer for all of us is that we can be those people for other people. That when someone asks if they have ever been around somebody with a glad and generous heart, that maybe it would be one of us that pops up in their minds. And as stewards of God's abundance, and we are stewards of God's abundance, that we can live lives with glad and generous hearts. It is our calling in this life. Money is an issue. It always has been, and it always will be. And anybody who tells you otherwise, as they say, is trying to sell you something. God calls us to be the beloved community. Sometimes that's hard and uncomfortable, but it is always holy work. Amen.